updates. Suchetna there in New Delhi. But let's really bring it back to a big story this evening with Mukesh Ambani's Infotel looking all set to bid for 2G spectrum. How will that really change the telecom landscape? We've got two experts with their take joining us on the show. There's Kunal Bajaj, joins us from New Delhi, and Shiv Putcha from here in Mumbai. Kunal, I'm going to start by asking you, how do you see the entry of a big player like Reliance really change the contours of the 2G spectrum auction?
If we look at the landscape for the 2G spectrum auction at the moment, it seems that there's only really one serious player from the previous new entrants, and clearly Uninor seems to be the one who's going to make sure that they, if the auction parameters are set in the right way, will continue to participate. Now, if we have one more player join the fray, then there is a possibility that the auction prices will get driven up pretty significantly, because the way it's being proposed by the DOT and the TRAI right now, it seems that there's really only space for one new entrant, which means there's only enough spectrum being auctioned for one new entrant to have a pan-India license. If you look for two new entrants trying to have a pan-India license, then there could be a serious fight there.
Okay, so there could be a serious fight, says Kunal. But Shiv, what's your take? Because arguably Mukesh Ambani has the deepest pockets of them all, and at a time when, you know, lenders don't really want to lend to telecom companies, how do you see his entry, that's Mukesh Ambani's entry, sort of change the game really? What does it mean for incumbents?
Well, I actually don't think that this is a big game changer. At this point of time, I actually view this as one more prospective bidder in this upcoming auction. All right, and the reason I say that is, as Kunal just alluded to, I don't see the demand this time around being very big. This is not like the 3G auction of a couple of years ago. So in this in this environment, I actually think a strong case can be made that the incumbents would actually stay away. If the entry of RIL is bad for anybody, I would actually argue it's bad for the new entrants, somebody like a Telenor. It's also a matter of the amount of spectrum available. Yeah.
But are you suggesting that even from a pricing point of view, entry of Reliance, which has deep pockets clearly, is not something that could shake up the sector? What would be a rationale, Shiv?
Well, in terms of the incumbents, and I would actually argue that they probably have a vested interest in staying away from this. I mean, if we have to keep in mind that number one, the reserve price is very high. So, A, do they want to spend this much money? Two, I actually don't think they're as desperate for spectrum as some of the like Uninor or some of the other newer entrants. So there's really not that sense of desperation for them to actually come in like they had to.
Let's get Kunal's perspective on this. Do you agree with what Shiv is saying? So even if, let's say, incumbents, large number of players, Airtel, Vodafone, Tata, Docomo and so on, do actually stay away, even then, if RIL was to make an entry, how will this really change the landscape, Kunal?
The way the auction is being structured right now and the way it looks the telecom policy is panning out, it seems that the result of the 1800 megahertz spectrum auction could be used as the benchmark for all the other payments that telcos will potentially have to make. So those payments include setting the benchmark price for future 900 megahertz auctions, setting the benchmark price for future 700 megahertz auctions, as well as looking at how much operators will need to pay as one-time fee for quote-unquote excess spectrum that they hold today. So, even if only one player comes in the 1800 megahertz auction at the proposed reserve price and is able to walk away with spectrum at that reserve price, or say at a higher price, what it'll do is it'll have a major ripple effect throughout the industry, because all the other benchmark payments, all the other payments that need to be made will be benchmarked against this closing price of the auction.
Shiv, from Infotel or Mukesh Ambani's point of view, all along the big noise really was about their 4G play. But, what's the rationale you're thinking it is in terms of them now wanting to really get into the voice space from a business viability point of view?
Well, I actually don't see this as a big surprise that they are going after, it's not about 2G or 3G spectrum, it's about voice. Now, as they've always spoken, they've talked up their data strategy, and but you have to keep in mind, historically there is no success story to my mind of a data only player. So voice was always, I think, on the cards, and now if there is spectrum available in an auction, they're going to bid for this. Yeah.
Kunal, yeah, all right. Kunal, is it fair to say that data is yet to be a huge story for telecom here in India, and voice will clearly be a focus area at least for the next couple of years?
Yeah, voice is not going to go away anytime soon. I don't think we're as mature a market as some of the Western countries are, where data is now starting to play a much larger role than voice. The reason is because we still haven't reached 100% teledensity. We've still got, large portions of the country left to cover with signal. We've still got affordability issues at the low end. And while 2G may be increasingly replaced by 3G networks in other countries, 2G networks in India are going to be around for a very long time to come. We have scale in 2G, we have handsets which are extremely affordable and therefore present a very low barrier to entry for new users to come on board. And as we spread out to the lower sections of the population and try and penetrate through offering more affordability, 2G will play a critical role in making that happen.
So Shiv, can one then safely conclude whether or not there are more players coming in for this auction, that the entry of Reliance will be critical in at least inflating the price?
But to an extent, I mean, if there is space really for one new entrant, a pan-India entrant, I think if they're the main entrant and they're only up against one or at the most two other bidders, I really don't see that this is going to go the same way that it did a couple of years ago in the 3G auction, when several players were in it. It went several rounds, and ultimately it went for a much higher price than the reserve price. I don't think we're going to have that type of scenario this time around.
Right. Just one final question to you, Shiv. Why do you think Mukesh Ambani wants 2G spectrum in the first place? Do you see him with a vision? Do you think that even as you pointed out, no one has made serious success of what the stories we have to see today, this could be a potential chance that he could actually make it with it?
I think, as I said, they've always needed voice spectrum. You have to keep in mind that the LTE spectrum that they have now, this version, the TDD flavor of LTE, for the moment, this is a data-only play, where you have LTE in the US and other markets where people are already using smartphones, with multi-mode devices and talking and doing data and so on. That's not quite the case with this flavor of TDD, at least not for several years. So in the interim period, they do need this voice to supplant that, the business case. Traditionally, it's always been a very successful voice business that has underwritten the data rollout. It's not the other way around. So I think this will plug a much needed gap in their offering as they go forward.
All right, Shiv, we'll leave it at that. Shiv Putcha there and Kunal Bajaj both joining us. Thanks for that, gentlemen. We'll take a breather here then on Business Tonight, but up ahead.